Our reading this morning is from the poet Carl Dennis. It's called The God Who Loves You. It must be troubling for the God who loves you to ponder how much happier you'd be today had you been able to glimpse your many futures. It must be painful for him to watch you on Friday evenings, driving home from the office, content with your week, 3 fine houses sold to deserving families, knowing as he does exactly what would have happened had you gone to your second choice for college, knowing the roommate you'd have been allotted whose ardent opinions on painting and music would have kindled in you a lifelong passion. A life 30 points above the life you're living on any scale of satisfaction. And every point a thorn in the side of the God who loves you. You don't want that. A large-souled man like you, who tries to withhold from your wife the day's disappointments so she can save her empathy for the children. And would you want this God to compare your wife with the woman you were destined to meet on the other campus? It hurts you to think of him ranking the conversation you'd have enjoyed over there higher in insight than the conversation you're used to. And think how this loving God would feel knowing that the man next in line for your wife would have pleased her more than you ever will. Even on your best days, when you really try. Can you sleep at night? Believing a God like that is pacing his cloudy bedroom, harassed by alternatives that you've spared by ignorance? The difference between what is and what could have been will remain alive for him, even after you cease existing. After you catch a chill running out in the snow for the morning paper, losing 11 years that the God who loves you will feel compelled to imagine scene by scene. Unless you come to the rescue, by imagining him no wiser than you are, no God at all, only a friend, no closer than the actual friend you made at college, the one you haven't written in months. Sit down tonight and write him about the life you can talk about with a claim to authority, the life you've witnessed, which for all you know is the life you've chosen. Thank you, Anne. So I woke up on Wednesday morning this past week, excited to turn on the news. I was excited to find out what the Supreme Court's decision would be on the constitutionality of the Defense of Marriage Act and on Proposition 8, which was the ballot initiative that overturned equal marriage in California. I know that if you're in this room today, you know what happened on Wednesday morning. JOMA was overturned. Prop 8 was sent back to the lower courts. It wasn't a sweeping victory for equal marriage, but it effectively makes same-sex marriage legal again in California. And importantly, it opens the door to lawsuits by same-sex couples in other states where marriage rights are restricted, with a strong precedent now set for equal protection under the law of gay and lesbian couples. All in all, it was good news for Unitarian Universalists and for all people who support love and justice. But I was so excited to see the news on Wednesday morning that I turned on the TV a little early. And I ended up catching another newsworthy moment in our week. It was the tail end of the Today Show. And Matt Lauer, the anchor, was interviewing celebrity chef Paula Deen about the contents of a deposition that she gave in a recent discrimination lawsuit. It was filed against her by an employee of her restaurant in Savannah, Georgia. If you haven't been following that story, Paula Deen admitted in the deposition that she said a number of offensive things to employees in her restaurant. She opined at one point on the loveliness of authentic plantation-style weddings where all of the servers would be middle-aged black men dressed as antebellum slaves. She admitted to using strong racial slurs and telling racially and ethnically charged jokes to her staff. She appeared in the deposition to confirm the truth of the plaintiff's accusations with rather shocking candor, almost suggesting she didn't really understand why anything she said was hurtful or wrong. Paula Deen has lost her contract with the Food Network in the past week, and a number of her endorsement deals have evaporated since the details of this deposition came out. But many have also stepped up to defend Paula, to defend her claim that nothing about the words she used or the jokes that she told were intended in a mean way. And on Wednesday morning, I got to watch Paula try to defend herself. "There's been some very hurtful lies said about me," she said. She explained that it had been a mistake for the Food Network to fire her. She did not apologize. And by the end of the interview, she was actually looking straight at the camera as she said, "If there's anyone out there that has ever said something they wish they could take back, if you're out there, please pick up that stone and throw it so hard at my head that it kills me. Please. I want to meet you." She said, "I is what I is, and I'm not changing." I read an article after the interview that quoted a public relations specialist and his take on how Paula has managed this crisis. "What you're seeing," he said, "is a person who has just been hit by a bus and her life as she knew it is over. Instead of strategy," he said, "there's sheer terror, chaos, and panic." A lot of us have been where Paula has been in one way or another. A lot of us have done something wrong and have reached out desperately for compassion or forgiveness, instead finding scorn and anger in its place. And when we find ourselves in this kind of situation, defense is a natural reaction. When we are threatened, we seek to protect ourselves. We become scared. And there are times when protecting ourselves in this way is the only way to literally survive. But there are times when protecting ourselves is about other things beyond simple survival. There are times when our defensiveness only reveals more deeply how attached we've become to whatever we had, that we're now afraid of losing, that we may have taken for granted all along. Our defensiveness reveals our degree of attachment to the comforts of our life, the things that have made everything else easier for us along the way, the things that may have made most of our days pleasant, helped all the parts of our lives make sense. Our defensiveness may reveal our attachment to our record of achievements, or to our well-crafted image of ourselves, or to others' opinions and approval of our lives. This defensiveness can get in the way of another possible choice for how we might react in these situations. When we've done wrong, we always have the option to accept it, to respond with humility. Humility is scarier for most of us and far more challenging. Humility means having the courage to expose the more vulnerable facets of ourselves to the world. It means saying, "Okay, this is me too. I make mistakes. I can be self-centered or inconsiderate, impulsive, unthinking. I have some bad ideas, and I've learned some things, and I picked up some habits that make me uncomfortable or that I'm not proud of. I wish I hadn't done wrong. I want to try to make this better." How does it feel to say those kinds of things to someone we've hurt, to someone we love, or are responsible for taking care of? Easy, right? Just rolls off the tongue? No, it's not easy at all. The thing about defensiveness, and why it's almost always the easier choice to make, is that it plays a really good psychological trick on us. When we've made a mistake or hurt someone or say the wrong thing, our defensive reflex jumps into action like a tiny little superhero in our brains, here to save the day. It promises to fix things, right? It promises to take control. We won't lose any of the things that we're afraid of losing. And before we know it, we're explaining ourselves, we're clarifying our intent, we're trying to hold on tighter and tighter to the thing that we most fear we might lose. Our brain can get so good at crafting the logic of defense, so much so that we get this close, not only to believing in the relative unimportance of our mistake, but even to convincing ourselves that we've always been in the right. I think this is part of what was going on when the Defense of Marriage Act passed in 1996. I think it's what happened for all the defenders of traditional marriage who saw that something they cared about was threatened. Their attachment to a specific kind of gender structure in the family and the household, their desire to see the society around them reflect a particular set of religious values that they held most dear, that gave them comfort and security. It led them into a kind of twisted defensive logic. There's an incredible video that you can find on YouTube, if you search it, of Dan Savage, the columnist and author, debating the president of the National Organization for Marriage, Brian Brown, on LGBT rights issues. It's about an hour long. It really is fascinating to watch. And in this hour, Brown repeats over and over that the official position of the National Organization for Marriage is that gay marriage actually is not possible. It's not legitimate, because marriage is a word with a commonly understood meaning that can't be changed. It's defined as a union of one man and one woman. This is the cornerstone of his argument. Now, there are lots of holes in this logic, as far as I can see. And Savage works every single angle. He pokes each one of these holes in his argument. He notes the circular logic of the position, just defining something as something and saying it has to be that thing. He brings up the fact that definitions of marriage have changed significantly over time and according to local context. And of course, he points out that the Bible itself sanctions lots of things that we don't consider part of traditional marriage today, like polygamy, forcing women into marriages against their will, and the sexual exploitation of female slaves, all part of biblical marriage. Brown isn't buying any of it. He is so caught up in his logic of defense and so confident in its ability to fix everything. He clings to it like it's the last thing he has to hold on to, while he watches the only moral structure for society that he knows and trusts begin to crumble all around him. Savage and Brown's conversation made for a very interesting debate. And we can all take some comfort in the fact that our side came out the victor in this most recent battle in the war over LGBT rights. But debates are all about defense. A debate is really just a fancy word for a street fight with no touching and lots of rules for good behavior. And fighting all the time is exhausting. Fighting doesn't help us learn to trust each other. It doesn't help us form relationships. Fighting doesn't lead to connection or empathy or transformation of one side or the other. It doesn't reveal our rich interdependence. In fact, it depends for its very life on the illusion of our separateness. A fight pretends that an injury to one is not an injury to us all. When one side wins and the other loses, it may feel great. It may feel validating for the winner. It may even secure important rights and protections that are necessary for the winner's survival. But it does not typically provoke a sincere change of heart in the loser. Do you think Brian Brown has changed his mind in light of this week's rulings? Instead, both sides typically retreat more deeply into their own camps after a fight. And the losing side creates a new defensive logic for why they should have won and how they can do better and prepare themselves more fully for the next battle. And this is what will continue to happen unless someone chooses to break the cycle. Unless the party who has done wrong makes the choice not to defend, but to respond with humility. I think sometimes we realize that the practice of humility has the potential to break this endless cycle. But we still don't choose it because we're too afraid of what we might lose. Defensiveness almost always wins out when we feel we can defend ourselves well enough to keep the legislative victory, or the Food Network contract, or the moral high ground, or whatever it is that we are attached to. But paradoxically, defensiveness erodes and eviscerates the one thing that when it's threatened, we're most afraid to lose: connection. It's the one thing we actually need more than anything else. Brené Brown is an academic in the field of social work and psychology. And she gave a TED Talk in 2010 on her years of research into human connection. What's clear from decades of research is that connection is why we're here, she says. Neurobiologically, it's how we're wired. It's what gives purpose and meaning to our lives. But for whatever reason, and the reasons are endlessly diverse, specific to each of our own life stories, we all carry some sense of shame. Some sense that I'm not good enough, I'm not blank enough, as Brené puts it, because it really doesn't matter what fills in that blank. I'm not thin enough, I'm not educated enough, I'm not rich enough, I'm not young enough, I'm not compassionate enough, whatever it may be for you or me. Shame, she says, is really easily understood as the fear of disconnection. That there's something about me that if other people know it or see it, I won't be worthy of connection. Defensiveness is a natural response to this sense of shame. This feeling that we're not good enough somehow, right? We have to cover it up. We have to fight it. If you think I'm not educated enough, then I'm going to defend to the death to prove to you that I'm smart. If you think what I said was inappropriate or discriminatory, I'm going to defend my intentions and prove to you that I'm still a good person. But even though we think it's going to work, even if we think we can win that battle, defensiveness doesn't heal the shame. It only roots it deeper. It only makes more and more of your life rest on the structure you've built up to defend yourself against a shame that you've devoted so much of your time to fighting, you've almost begun to believe it yourself. It only wraps you up further and further in that twisted logic of defense, of winners and losers, disconnected from each other, fighting all the time. It's exhausting. Brené Brown says the only thing that can heal our shame is excruciating vulnerability. Sounds great, right? Excruciating vulnerability. The humility to let our whole selves be seen, with all our flaws and screw-ups intact. And the only thing that makes this excruciating vulnerability bearable, she says, is having a sense of worthiness. The research that she's done, scientific research, actually shows this. People are able to heal shame and connect through vulnerability only if they have a strong sense of worthiness, love, and belonging. And the only reason, Brown says, that certain people have this strong sense of worthiness is that they believe it. That's the key. The only reason, they trust it. They believe they're worthy of love and belonging. That's it. It may be easier said than done, but that's it. It's spiritual work. It's Unitarian Universalist spiritual work. We all have inherent worth. We're all worthy of connection. In the poem I shared during our reading this morning, the main character, is so caught up in the shame of his life. He is so obsessed with all the ways that his life as it is just not good enough. All the ways it could have been better. He can't imagine a God who loves him just as he is. Can you sleep at night, the poet asks, believing a God like that is pacing his cloudy bedroom, harassed by alternatives you've spared by ignorance? At the end of this poem, the man is on the cusp of surrendering to the sheer exhaustion that his shame and defensiveness have created in his life. Maybe the God who loves him loves his life just as it is. Maybe he can learn to see that God as a friend, ready to hear about the life he can talk about with a claim to authority, the life he has chosen, flaws and all. Defending our inherent worth and trusting our inherent worth are two very different things. On Wednesday morning, as I watched, Paula got it twisted. But I know what she was doing. I've been there. We've all experienced what she's experienced because we've all felt the sting of a shame that threatens our sense of worth. Paula said, "I is what I is. I am whole and worthy," she was trying to tell us. Defending, resisting the shame brought on by her mistakes. And she is. She is whole and worthy. We all are. But we need to know that. We don't need to convince anyone else of it. We need to know. Defensiveness happens when we forget. It's not our job to defend our worth to anyone else. It's our job to trust it and to affirm the worth of others. Seek the truth of our connection. Find humility. Make amends. Repair the damage we may have caused or contributed to. It's our job to loosen ourselves from shame and move forward together, realizing that the God who loves you, the inherent worth intrinsic in your being, has been there all along. Amen.